What's up, guys? So we just got done about a week ago recording our second Bigger Ground Speed and Agility seminar. We covered a lot in these 2 hours. This was a beast of a seminar. We discussed all things involving, strength, its involvement in speed, body composition, mobility, linear speed, including absolute speed, and acceleration, as well as some theory on hamstring injuries and why they happen during sprinting and ways that we might be able to prevent that. Included throughout the whole thing over a dozen videos. Then we discussed multidirectional speed, including change of direction and agility developments of each, and the differences between each. We went deep into each of these. We used the entire 2 hours. It was amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better group of coaches and athletes to participate in this. We also did hands-on drills for each portion, so you'll see all of those as well. And enjoy, guys. I'm the head of sport performance here at Bigger Ground Performance. Basically, I take all the athletes in. I do outreach to schools, high schools, clubs, parents, whatever it is, and I'll train everyone here, any athletes that come in. I want to start by thanking you guys for coming. How many of us are coaches here? Like strength coaches or sport coaches? Yeah, that means a lot that you guys are here. I think as a coach, whatever kind of coach you are, bringing your education and taking that seriously and learning, especially you guys in track and field, you might know more about certain things than me, right? Or I know more certain about things than you, but kind of interacting on those things, I think that means a lot. So, commend you guys for coming. Okay, so quick overview of what we're going to go over. Okay, so foundational requirements for speed. We'll go over body composition, strength, and mobility. This will be kind of just a brief overview. And important to keep in mind, guys, obviously all of this stuff is just a bird's eye view of everything. Everything we're talking about can be its own PhD course, right? So I'm just giving you a bird's eye view of the whole picture here. Linear speed, acceleration versus absolute speed, and then multi-directional speed, change of direction, agility. And we'll get to the differences when we get to that slide. Okay, so a little about my background, just so you guys know. I started at ASU. Got my degree in exercise science, minor in nutrition while I was there. From there, I did an internship at Exos. I worked with Nick Winkelman, one of the leading speed coaches in the world, with the NFL Combine, as well as NFL, UFC, MLB, and then a lot of high school youth athletes, general population, kind of all over the board. Fell in love with S&C, got an internship with UCLA football, so moved straight to LA after I graduated, did a summer internship with the off-season there. Went to University of Denver. From there, worked with all 17 of their sports teams, and I got to see what a national championship team looks like. So they had won the national championship in hockey while I was there, so that was pretty cool to see that. Went from there to Seattle U, did a graduate assistantship, got my master's degree in sports administration and leadership. I was in charge of the strength and conditioning programs for track and field, cross country, tennis, and swim, and then softball my first year as well. Did another internship for my master's degree in Miami at FIU. Worked with the football team as well as some other sports there. Went from there back to Seattle U. Got a job as injured players coordinator with the Seawolves, where I got to see another national championship team. We won the national championship for the second year in a row. I was basically in charge of rehabbing and return to play protocols, strength and conditioning for all long-term injured players. Now I'm the head of sport performance here at Bigger Ground. And so I say this stuff not to impress you guys, but to impress upon you that I've seen these things done, that I'm going to talk about in the real world, right? Not just in a textbook. And this is kind of stuff that, yes, I have mentors that are much, much smarter than me on these things, but I can still give you guys a good overview of what this stuff looks like in real life in a lot of different places. Okay? So, foundational requirements for speed. We're going to start talking about this first. Speed is made in the kitchen. Okay, body fat is a weight vest weighing you down at all times. Body fat is not metabolically active, it just kind of sits there, so it's weighing you down consistently. Muscle allows, and we'll get more into this, for increased potential of force production and explosiveness. It does not mean that you'll get faster just from getting bigger, it just allows a higher potential for that. Proper nutrition is obviously vital for lean muscle mass and low body fat. We're gonna go over the 3 Ps of speed development. This comes from Exos and Nick Winkleman. And again, it's easy to just kind of put things into 3 categories, but this obviously is much more complicated than this, but I think it makes it really easy to just kind of break things up like this, okay? So, first one is gonna be position. So, mobility or stability. Can I even get in those positions that are either advantageous or, and we'll talk more about this, or disadvantageous in sport that happen, and be safer to get in and out of those positions without risking injury or even get into them in the first place, right? From there, coordination. So we'll be talking mainly about pattern. This is going to be the bulk of the presentation. What's up, Cal? Sit in the front. For my track athletes. So, pattern. Okay, pattern's going to be the bulk of our presentation today. Essentially, what that is coordination. Whether that's limb coordination, joint angles, that sort of thing, mechanics, okay, motor learning, that falls into pattern. And the top of the pyramid is going to be power, strength, power qualities, speed, strength, the force velocity curve, which we'll talk about in a second. We're going to start with talking about power, and then we'll kind of go all over the place here. We'll start with power, and then we'll go to position, and we'll spend the rest of the time on pattern, which is when we'll go to our practical. Okay, so importance of strength. I wouldn't be a strength and conditioning coach if I didn't like getting people stronger, right? So there's a lot of evidence coming out that a lot of like theoretical research that strength helps with speed, but strength doesn't allow force. So strength doesn't immediately bring speed, right? So if a strength coach ever says like, if you put more force into the ground, you're immediately going to get faster. That's not actually true. What's actually more important is knowing how to use that strength quickly in the correct force vectors and with the right mechanics, right? So we have the strength, that is a secondary, that does lead to a secondary increase in speed potential, but it doesn't automatically make you faster. So it's important to take these all into consideration, but it's still extremely important. Okay, we're gonna nerd out for a second. So Newton's second law of motion, okay, force equals mass times acceleration. So more force, okay, allows for a higher potential, mass in this case being body weight, to accelerate faster, okay? Acceleration equals force divided by mass. So essentially what this means is that the acceleration depends on the body weight, okay, and the force acting upon that body weight, okay? So that has to be taken into account as well when we're strength training. And then power equals force times distance divided by time. So we have this time added now, okay? You can see this is meant to show you guys why strength is important, because we see this force in a lot of these equations that lead to speed, okay? And then lastly, Newton's third law of motion is for every action there's equal and opposite reaction. So if I can put force into the ground in the correct way, fast enough with the correct vectors, that exact amount of force will propel me forward or laterally or whichever way I'm going. So an easy way I like to think of this and kind of how strength will play into strength and hypertrophy, etc., will play into speed development is a rowboat, right? So the amount of rowers in the rowboat would be like the amount of muscle fibers or like the amount of hypertrophy, right? That's going to allow for more potential for the rowboat to go faster. Now, if those rowers are able to row harder, that's the amount of strength that those new muscle fibers have, or those increased size muscle fibers have, right? The amount of strength, they can row harder. And then now if they're rowing in synchrony, they're going even faster now, which would be the amount of power or explosiveness, motor unit recruitment that we'll go into. Okay, essentially this is just going over what I had just said. Increase of muscle fibers gives an increased potential for strength. Increased force production, increased potential to drive more force into the ground. Increased force, increased potential for that force in a fast, explosive manner. And then essentially more force produced faster, okay, with good muscle and tendon elasticity. And we actually won't get into the elasticity piece today, but that is huge. And that's a huge piece of research right now. This this elasticity of the muscle and tendon and springiness of what's going on. And the correct vectors, so the correct directions, which we'll talk about as well, will equal more speed. So this is a quick overview of the force velocity curve. A lot of our strength coaches and track coaches have already seen this, but it's a quick overview, okay? So we can see, and this is one way to do it. Who knows about velocity-based training here? Yeah, so basically this would be, you can take this exact same curve and change it into meters per second, right? But, and that there's research coming out on that too. But for the purposes of today and for the purposes of simplicity and kind of what we have available to us here, we will go over everything in terms of 1 rep max. So how much can I put out for 1 rep, how much weight? Okay, max strength, 90 to 100%, and then going all the way to max velocity, okay, which is less than 30% 1RM. And when we get to max velocity, we have to keep in mind, less than 30% 1RM might mean less than body weight. So we will incorporate assisted, band-assisted jumps, band-assisted sprints, that sort of thing. And to go over what's going on here, we have force, okay, and velocity. So we can see the higher the force, the less velocity, which means we don't only want to train for strength. Okay, we want to work this whole curve. We just ride the wave of this curve when we're doing our strength training. We want to hit all aspects here. So this is a good example here of the ideal what would happen after an effective training program. So the curve is shifted up and to the right. Okay, there's more force allowed to be produced, and now that force can also be produced faster. This is 2 separate, different athletes. Okay, this is a hypothetical situation of 2 different types of athletes that were trained differently. Okay, this is an example of what we just looked at. This is the force velocity curve we just looked at. Okay, this blue one. This is an athlete here who's only been speed trained. Okay, so we can see his force is really low. His velocity is really high, but he's not able to put as much force in that high velocity, right? Now, this is an athlete who's only been strength trained. He's really strong, but he's really slow, is essentially what that would look like. So this is an important distinction to make, okay? Speed equals distance over time, so that'd be like meters per second. Velocity, though, equals distance over time, so speed plus direction. Okay, so it's important to remember that when I'm training for strength, we need to know when I'm going into an acceleration, we'll talk more about this, I have to be able to produce force this way, horizontally. So my strength training should include some things that produce force horizontally, whether that's broad jumps, resisted broad jumps, bounding, resisted bounding, that sort of thing. Knowing how to produce force this way is key for speed. If we're only training this way all the time, while it is important, we're not getting the whole picture. Okay, now we're going to go, again, huge, really brief overview of strength, and we can go deep into all of that, but we're just going to keep moving along to positions, okay? Mobility and stability. Force and mobility. So, when I look at these 2 pictures, okay, we see athlete here in a 3-point stance, and we see an athlete here who's already taken off. Okay, both of these positions require good mobility to even get into. Can the athlete get his hips nice and high? Can the athlete even get in this position at the ankle, at the knee, etc.? Okay, does he have the hamstring and hip mobility to even get there? Can this athlete, after he takes off, can he even get his knee high enough to drive back into the ground with enough force to move himself forward? Or is his mobility so bad that he's going to have to stay low the entire time, and his stride rate is going to be way too high, but stride frequency is going to be way too high, but the length is going to be low, right? So he also has enough mobility here to keep the torso still and kind of quiet torso and move the arms and legs around there, which we'll talk about in a second. Importance of mobility, it's important to know, okay, it allows for increased range of motion. I think this is one of the most important things. Allows for increased range of motion in disadvantageous positions, okay? In field sport, especially, there's a lot of weird positions that athletes get in that we might not be able to train for in the weight room, right? So, knowing how to build strength in weird positions means that we might have less of a risk of injury when those athletes do get into some weird positions, whether that's valgus at a very, very high speed, maybe the hip is rotated as he's turning, that sort of thing. Helps with decreasing risk of non-contact injuries, like I said, we are getting in some weird positions. More strength increases decreased potential of injury. Okay, allows for the body to get in positions that are most optimal for boosting speed. So on the other side of the spectrum, now I can have the, like I said in the last slide, the ability to even get into advantageous positions to move faster. Allows for the ability to get in mechanically advantageous position during technical work. So while the athlete is practicing and then while in play, technical work can also be what we're going to do today on the turf, speed work, right? And then while in play, meaning in practice or competition. Okay, really quick overview of those two things. Now we're going to get into linear, we're going to start with linear speed, okay? Starting with pattern is now going to be the rest of what we're talking about. So speed essentially equals stride length times stride frequency. In other words, the length of my stride and then how fast those strides are going. Okay, so one is always, if one of these is lagging, the other one is going to take over. So for example, if stride length, whether it's due to strength deficit, mobility deficit, even if it's just mechanics, whatever it is, stride frequency is going to take over. So there's going to be a really quick turnover, which might not allow for as much force production, and it works vice versa as well. Okay, so both of these are important to train. We're going to see how we can train both of those. Okay, so a lot of strength coaches will think kind of nixing, have lately been nixing linear speed. I think linear speed is slowly becoming more accepted again in this S&C community because people are realizing the value of it. But if I'm only running straight ahead, or if I'm in field sports, right, if I'm not only running straight ahead, if I'm going all these different directions, why should I be training linear speed? Why is it even important? So we're going to talk about why it's important. So scenarios that are rare that may come up in games but not in practice, right? So sometimes there's not a lot of linear direction in practices for field sports, but in games, when it does come up, it actually usually ends up being a really big play. So for example, in rugby or football, when there's a long linear sprint, usually they're going for a touchdown or a try. That's just usually what's happening. That's just a quick example, right? Same thing in soccer. You have to sprint straight ahead for a long time with the ball. Well, it's not the same thing as pure linear speed because they're carrying a ball or kicking a ball, which we'll talk about when we get to agility. The principles still remain the same. Okay, linear speed almost always occurs after changing direction. So if I'm changing direction, if I'm going into a cut and I have to go the other way, I'm getting into linear speed again anyways, right? If common sense tells me getting from here to here, the fastest way is just to turn that way and run, right? So I always do want to be able to get into linear sprinting in some way. Once I'm there, I need to know what to do. Okay, great opportunity for training strength, power, core strength, hamstring strength, ankle strength, elasticity, CNS, injury prevention, and even more. These are all things that all get trained when we're doing sprinting, right? In the weight room or mobility, etc. We can't train all of these things all with one movement, like with sprinting, right? It's pretty irreplaceable. So we got to stop thinking about just running this way. That's not all sprinting is. It's not just running this way. We're training all these different qualities. You can imagine that having these qualities here will be really good for when we train multidirectional speed and agility, right? It's gonna assist in that. Okay, every step offers a different training effect. We'll get into some theory about as we go faster with our sprinting, step by step, the different qualities we're training. Takeaway, like I said, okay, linear sprinting should not be neglected. Acceleration equals change in velocity over change in time. So essentially, how fast can I get to 0 to 60 is essentially what we're saying here. How fast can I speed up before I get to my maximal speed? Okay, so when I think of acceleration, we not only think of like just getting faster, we also can think of it, so like a race car, okay, getting 0 to 60 as fast as it can. Okay, this would be like a rugby scrum. Okay, it's very important for these guys to know how to get into a low and explosive position and be powerful and injury prone and non-injury prone in these positions, right? Here, okay, two basketball athletes are speeding up to get the ball, right? One of them needs to speed up before the other person to get that ball. This is a football athlete, okay, making a breakaway. So he's broken away, now he's going to speed up as quick as he can. So, acceleration zone, 0 to 20 yards. Okay, it's important to emphasize this so we can understand the difference between acceleration and absolute speed and the qualities that we're going to train and how we train each. After 20 yards, the posture, position, and pattern, they start to transfer, they change drastically. And then we're starting to talk about absolute speed mechanics, which are important to be trained as well, and we'll get into that. 0 to 10 yards, again, every athlete is a little bit different, right? So this is just a kind of a range, but essentially you can see 1 to 6 contacts, okay? 10 to 20 yards, we have now about 7 to 11 contacts. And then the start versus the transition. So start is going to be contacts 1 through 3, and then we're transitioning more into that absolute speed. We're rising, and we'll talk about that, from contacts 4 to 11, okay? Okay. So acceleration, we're going to have a much longer ground contact time, meaning the time that I'm on the ground needs to be longer, because if I'm starting from 0 meters per second, I'm going to have to put more force into the ground in a longer amount of time, right, to go forward as fast as I can. So I need more time on the ground. Less time on the ground, so we get athletes who maybe will get off the ground too quick during acceleration, and they might not have enough time to put force into the ground to get forward quicker, because they don't have enough force being generated. Piston-like leg action, okay? So the leg is gonna come up, the knee's coming up, and driving down. We don't want to see too much of a cyclical action until we get more of a rise, sort of to the end phases of acceleration. The reason for that is because as I come up, first of all, if I get more of a cyclical action here, I'm usually going to pull with the hamstring, but I also am not getting as much force as if I'm driving right back under me and forward, right? Big arm action. We want the arms to be in line, add sort of a assistance to the lower body to bring myself forward. Most rapid increase in velocity happens during acceleration. Okay, so half of the maximal velocity is achieved by the end of the second step. And then up to 85% of max velocity can be reached in the first 20 yards. So that kind of shows how important it is to train acceleration. And we're largely driven by horizontal force. So we talked briefly about this in the strength portion, where we need to know how to train in the correct force vectors, right? We need to train, we know that strength and power and speed is force vector specific. So I need to know how to launch this way quickly. Couple of technical goals. Synchronize explosive arm and leg action like we talked about. Piston-like action, low leg swing, okay? Again, we don't want too much of a hamstring pull, we want more of the hips involved, okay? Optimize direction of force to maximize horizontal velocity. A couple other technical considerations. Okay, so the toe off to contact is going to be the most applicable to pretty much every sport that involves acceleration, which is almost every sport, right? The back knee, so if we look at an acceleration position, the back knee, okay, shouldn't be, and this is kind of a reason I don't know who's heard of triple extension. A lot of people have heard of triple extension. I actually don't teach triple extension because when we're actually coming out of a start, we're not getting triple extension. I teach to use the hips and explode through the hips, but getting full extension out of the knee actually doesn't happen and should not fully extend, because then we're getting an energy leak here. That joint is locking, and now I don't have as much elasticity to bring my leg forward again. So the problem usually is most people don't have that problem. Most people actually are too bent. So most people have too much of a bend. Okay, that usually needs to be coached out of or assess if the mobility and strength is there. Front knee about 90 degrees. Okay, this puts the foot in a good position to drive under the center of mass, or sorry, behind the center of mass. So if we talk about in front of the center of mass or directly under, if I'm landing directly under my center of mass, what's gonna happen? Does anyone know? I'm gonna fall on my face, right? So we do want a little bit behind. Okay, that is gonna happen. Okay, so instead of just right under, if it's not directly right under the hips, that's actually okay. Okay, toe pointed up. That way I have more elasticity to bring my foot back down, and then synchronize the knee drive, the back knee drive, and the driving front leg. Okay, so this is gonna help that action going into the max velocity. Okay, no cyclical action until after the third step, like we talked about. Okay, so here's an example of an athlete, and before I show this, I always like to say, if we're coaches who always show the athletes that look good and look perfect aren't showing you everything, right? So I like to show everything. that I can. So this is an athlete here. There's a lot of stuff going on. So let's try to think about. Obviously, there's a false step, but we won't get to that today. Definitely not ideal. This was his second day with me. So this is a basketball player. He hadn't sprinted. This was his first time sprinting in about a year. You think he was coming back from a knee injury. Let's look at this again. Can you guys point out some things that don't look right? Like the big things, right? A lot of stuff doesn't look right, but.
Limiting his arm movement up.
What's that?
Limiting his arm movement up.
Okay. Like he's not moving his, okay. There might be a lack of maybe torso mobility or shoulder mobility. Yeah.
Incomplete hip extension.
That's the one I'm looking for in right now, because the biggest thing. So what do we think this athlete was told by a previous coach?
Stay low.
Stay low. He was told stay low, stay low, stay low. So look at how he has that huge break in the hips, and his because he has that huge break in the hips, you can see how low his recovery is. So it's preventing him from getting optimal force output. He literally just cannot get enough force into the ground. And again, so we talk about I like to start with the big things, right? So one of the biggest things is going to be the hips, fixing the hips. Usually, if we fix the bigger things, we'll talk about this when we get to the coaching pyramid. If we fix the big things, usually the small things like the arms or the stride length will usually take care of itself. Not always, but usually. Okay, so here is, before I show this, so this is a clip. Now what I did again, showing the not perfect stuff, I basically said keep your hips through. I coached him through all the stuff that he should think about to do, and this is what happened. Essentially, I overcoached him. The same one. Okay, essentially I overcoached him. This is the right one. So what does this look like now? Now he stood straight up, popped up too quick, right? Which means now he's producing too much vertical force and not enough horizontal force. So now he's limited in a different way because I overcoached him. So what I did was I was like, all right, forget everything I just said. I'm gonna put a band around your hips, and I'm just gonna have you sprint as fast as you can with the band 2 times. And this is what happened. Again, not perfect, but we can see there's a pretty decent difference. We're getting a little more if we look back at the first step. Definitely not perfect, but we look back at the first step, we are getting a little bit of a better hip extension out of that, just from doing a couple drills where I added an external cue with the band to get his hips forward, right? So here's another example of a drill that we'll do. This is Emily. She's the head strength and conditioning coach for the Storm, which is the WNBA team here, and she trains here. So what we're doing here is we're teaching Emily to push back into the ground in a horizontal fashion, and she's able to get a good lean because she's able to lean forward. I usually tell the athletes to do a trust fall. That puts them in a good position to come forward. Again, guys, this stuff doesn't replace sprinting at all. We still need to actually do the thing, but this at least puts the athlete in good positions. Another example, ready? Go. Here's another, okay. These athletes are doing, I didn't mean to turn the volume on. Go. Okay, these are 2 athletes, Max included in this, where's Max? In the back. Okay, so these are, that's a soccer athlete I have, Nick, and then Max is a basketball athlete here, he's in the back. So, lean, fall, run, basically I'm just having them pull, if they imagine how they're having a brim of their hat, kind of pulling them towards the ground. And then as soon as they feel like they're about to stumble, that's when they drive out. This is putting them again in a good forward lean, and it's getting them there in a way that, again, is specific to them. So how can they get there themselves without me coaching them up too much? Okay, we're almost there. So practical goals: generate as much horizontal force as possible in minimal time, maximize the technique, and then optimize the horizontal force in excess of necessary vertical force. Again, I don't want to fall on my face, and we've all seen, who's ever seen an athlete doing a linear sprint where it looks like they're falling the whole time, right? So that's because there's too much horizontal force, and they might need more vertical force work because they're just falling the whole time and stumbling. You can kind of see that with some athletes. So everything's a balance. Posture, okay, I like to say with the posture, so again, so here, I like these speed coaching pyramids. This is another thing brought by Exos from their online course, but posture is always gonna be kind of the base of things. Arm action does have a bit of a small amount of an effect on speed, but fixing posture and fixing leg action will generally fix the arms a lot of the time. So if we fix the big things, usually the small things take care of itself. So posture meaning, okay, this is going to be the same with absolute speed. Quiet torso, strong core, while my arms and legs are moving around the core. Okay, core meaning shoulders to hips. Okay, front side and back side leg action. I have again that piston-like leg action. Here, I like to think if the knee is the hammer, the foot is the nail, the higher the hammer is, the more force I can put into the nail into the ground, right? And then arm action, we want that explosive arm action like we talked about coming out. Okay, we're gonna go into hands-on now, guys. So let's do this. We're actually gonna take away the chairs. So everyone just put their chairs to the side over here. And you can put your badge to the side as well, and we probably just won't bring the chairs back. We're gonna get 3 rows of 5, okay, along the turf here. So go ahead, we're gonna 3 rows of 5. So 5, 5, 5. This might get in the way, so if it gets a little organized back here, that's okay.
Finally got that.
For the demo? So start with 2-point start.
There we go.
That's fine. Your sport will be over that time. Okay, so really quick, okay, Cam, one of our interns, is going to show us how to start with a 2-point start. Okay, so this will be on a 2-point start, and she's going to sprint 10 yards. So we're going to show them how to even get a 2-point start. She's going to start with 2 feet on the line, so on the line like this. And then in this case, so both feet. In this case, now we're lucky because we have a line. If there's not a line here, even just having both feet lined up, now she's gonna bring 1 foot back, and then that front knee or that back knee is gonna line up with the front toe, so she'll come all the way down. And then she's gonna come up, okay, feet are about hip width apart, she's at a low angle, eyes down, she's gonna explode out, and she's gonna go 10 yards. Okay, she'll go through the 10. Okay, again, so we're gonna go in groups of 5 on my go. Again, it's a little unorganized with the boxes here, but that's okay. So 1, 2, 3, 5 across. Yeah, across. Just because there's way too many people. Yeah. Okay, so let's get set up for our 2-point start. It's a big group today. I like it. Okay. Go. Good. So we're putting this together, right? We always want to take the full movement. We have to remember movement happens in a dynamic fashion, right? Movement is not an isolated sprinting or whatever it is. Life is not an isolated action. So we want to put everything together in the beginning, see how things look, let the athlete feel it, and then we'll break it up into drills, and then we'll put it all back together again at the end. Okay, so here we go. 2-point start. Let's get set up. Again, that front knee is lining up with the toe. Back knee lining up. Yeah. Okay, now we're gonna come up. Forward lean. Go! Like it, guys. All right, group 3. Make sure we go around so, yeah, no one gets nailed. Got some speed. Like it. Okay, we're gonna go do a couple wall drills now. Okay, Cam's gonna demo some some wall drills. And we have a limited amount of space. So, yeah. Okay, so she's gonna get against the wall at about a 45-degree angle. Okay, and again, quick thing about wall drills. So, wall drills get a lot of slack for maybe they're not a really good way to, they were previously done to teach like dorsiflexion, and they've been said, well, it might not really be a good way to teach dorsiflexion because no one's actually sprinting, right? But in this case, I like to use wall drills to teach forward projection for acceleration, right? So she's gonna bring the left leg up first. Okay, this back knee, this back ankle here, she has a couple iPhone distance or a couple deck of cards distance off the ground. Okay, she's gonna go load. She's gonna push her hips back, slightly bend, and lift. Explodes through the wall. Load, lift. She's trying to jam her hips all the way through the wall. Ready? Load, lift. So you can see that horizontal force being produced. Okay, let's get lined up. We can even, if you guys can put your hands on your stuff over here, it's all done. So, spread out. And we're gonna get 5 each side on my counts, okay? So we'll start with the left leg up. You got it. You already did this today. Do it again though. This isn't gonna go. Yeah, you can scoot over now. You can go right through the count. Okay. So that leg up. Remember that leg. It was balance on the water, on the knee, and on the toe. Okay, on that. Okay, now when I say load, we're going to push the hips back, hips back, foot back, eyes are going to come down, and we're going to explode up. Ready? Load. Lift. Load. Lift. Load. Lift. Load. Lift. Explode forward. Load. Lift. Nice. Switch sides. Okay, other side. So we're going to bring that right leg up. So we're starting to kind of feel, right, a little bit of a workout. You're going to feel it in the calf, the hips. Remember, we're not going for upward force, we're going for forward horizontal force. Hips are going to stay through. Good posture, shoulders down and back. Okay, ready, load. Lift. Load. Lift. Load. Lift. Load. Lift. Load. Lift. Nice. All right. Woo. Oh yeah. Well, what we're going to be doing on the wall, load, I'll need to demo this cam. Load, lift, and switch. Now, important with the switch, we'll go over that in a second. So, she's going to go up, left leg up. Load, lift. So don't switch until I say switch. That's a good progression though. That's a good progression. Okay, so leg up, yeah, so load, lift, switch. I like it. Load, lift, switch. So again, she's not bouncing up and down, vertical force. We're teaching horizontal force, so she's driving into the wall. Load, lift, switch. On that switch, she's driving into the wall. Here we go. Let's get it lined up.
Good.
Alright, starting with the left leg up. Let's get it sync. Okay, deck of cards under that back heel. Shoulders down and back. Good posture. Tight. Ready? Load. Lift. Switch. 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 One more. Load. Lift. Switch. There we go. Got time for a couple more. Harness marching.
I say you're right about
Oh, we didn't even started.
And this one.
Okay, sweet. So we saw this in the presentation with with Emily on the video. We're gonna try it ourselves now. So we're gonna go into that trust fall like I talked about. So she's gonna trust me and just fall, get a good lean, that 45 like on the wall. I'm gonna say go, she'll go into marching. Go! And again, I would normally start, guys, teaching an athlete how to just march without the band, but for the sake of just this workshop, we're just gonna jump right into banded march. Okay, get good explosiveness out of that and bring us 10 yards. Okay, at the top of that, remember keeping that good forward lean. Remember we talked about the hips. And at the top of that movement, she's able to balance a cup of water on her knee and on her toe. So adequate hip flexion and adequate dorsiflexion to drive back under. Okay, so we got bands over here already set up. We're gonna go, if we got 15, just partner up with whoever's next to you, and you go with whoever's on hand out. Or you're not doing it. Got it, okay. So you have
I'll go first. No, we were doing this in
we should have
like
7
high school.
groups of 2,
My
so
boy
that
like
should
all the
be,
band.
you just have everyone go.
This now? Oh, well, yeah. That's on you.
I didn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you get that state title and wait to look into the
Right?
every minute.
No, that's good.
So, really quick, we had a good question. So we had a question, why are we putting the harness, or why are we putting the band around the shoulders as opposed to the hips? My answer to that is I do both. So for people who need more of a forward lean, they already have good hip extension, I'll put them in this with this drill. People who might need to work on more hip extension when they're coming out, they might need that external feedback at the hips here, right? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, here we go. We're gonna go 10 yards, right? Trust fall. And go. Oh, I like it, a bunch of athletes. Okay, striking under the center of mass.
A lot of breath holders.
Good, 10 yards. Okay, let's switch partners. We'll switch partners, we'll go back. You out, Kyle? You got practice later. So.
Yeah, I got practice today.
Okay, so we'll go into trust fall again. You can see how we're teaching that horizontal force production here, and how there is a necessity. We also can see here that there is a necessity for some vertical force when the athlete's like, whoa, I'm actually falling now, right? Here we go, ready? Go! We got 10 yards. There we go. I want to hear a little bit quieter. I don't want to hear too much stomping because I want a lot of good switch on that. Okay? I like it. Woo! Okay, for the sake of time, we're just going to go through one sprint. Remember how I said everything at the end, so this would be like a very short thing. We're not going through all the stuff. But at the end, we want to put everything together and let the athlete feel what things feel like now. See if there's a difference as a coach, right? So let's get in our lines again. So we'll get in our lines of 5, or rows of 5. Okay, and on my go, so 2-point stance, just like we started with. We're going to start and finish with the entire movement. Go! We have less people? Go! Some people gave up. Nice work. Thank you. Woo!
Very nice.
All right. Yeah. Now that we're nice and warm. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we skipped the warm up. Yeah. Did anyone feel a little different on the second sprint?
Yeah.
What do you feel different about?
I almost felt like I was leaning too forward.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Some athletes might already be leaning forward too much. So if you put an athlete on this who's already falling, that might actually hinder them, right? We might need to do more hip extension or some more vertical force production.
I really like that actually. So I'd use a lot of like mock drills, but more upright, but using stuff with the band just to translate more to an acceleration based thing. I like that a lot.
Right. Good. Awesome, guys. Let's take a seat back on the ground so we don't want to keep moving everything, if that's okay. Yeah. think of absolute speed. So, when I think of absolute speed, you don't want to just think of sprinting forward for 40 yards or 20 yards when we transition like we talked about. You want to think about what's happening in field sports as well. Okay, so in field of court sports. So, or obviously for those who work with military, right? There's still a lot of, this involves a lot of that as well. So things still apply, it's all still applies. So, soccer players, it looks like they're more upright here, right? They've been sprinting for a while to try to get to the ball, or they're kicking the ball as they're running far. This athlete has to catch up. This athlete might have been sprinting for, again, a while, maybe all the way across the court. Right here, athlete is going, they clearly look like they've picked up speed, right? So these things happen in sport. Maybe rarely, this doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's important, right? So we need to train for that if it's not happening a lot in practice. And we'll talk about this in a second. Now, we will get a little bit into the differences between, there are big differences when I'm sprinting with a ball involved, an external object or a gun or whatever it is, versus just without anything. There's big differences in mechanics, and we're going to have to talk about that. That's a hot topic right now in terms of knee injuries, hamstring injuries, that sort of deal. And we'll talk about that when we get to agility. So just bear with me. We'll think of this as pure absolute speed. Okay? Defining absolute speed, again, beyond 20 yards. Greater, remember we said 85% can be hit just from acceleration of max speed. So anything over 80% of max speed will be defined as absolute speed. Contacts 12 to 20 or more. Again, every athlete's different. Technique has now changed. Upright posture. There's more of a cyclical leg action because I'm more upright now, so my feet, and we'll go into this, I don't have as much time on the ground. I'm picked up so much speed that now I can get that foot off the ground a lot quicker. I don't have as much time to be on the ground and produce force anymore. A very short ground contact time, like I said. Okay, this was taken from Charlie Francis. This is called his high-low model, right? So, high intensity or low intensity is generally what we'll train at. Injured or athletes who are in pain might be sort of an exception to this, but just take a healthy athlete, just use this as an example, as someone who is training for sprinting, right? Training for speed. So, high intensity and low intensity are where we're going to be training at. We want to skip this medium intensity ground. So 95 to 100% of best time, or 75% or slower. The reason, high intensity training has a high central nervous system demand, a lot of muscle fiber recruitment, okay, it requires a lot of recovery, and it requires more rest in between because it's so demanding, right? Low intensity is good for recovery, circulatory response, okay, increased blood flow, CNS recovery. Medium intensity, though, is too slow to be specific to training. It's too high to recover adequately within 24 hours, and the CNS recovery limited by lack of circulatory response. So if I only have 5 days to train an athlete or less, right, I really can't hit all of these anyways. So we're going to take what's most important, which would be the high intensity and low intensity. Just a quick overview of the high-low model. This is an example this is from Derek Hansen, and this would be Derek Hansen, a famous sprint coach. So this would be a 5-day layout, 7-day if you count the optional recovery work, but 5-day layout for speed training. So we have this high intensity day, these high intensity days here, okay, where there's max strength, heavy weights, high intensity or high speed sprinting. And then this would be sort of more conditioning tempo work, kind of lower in intensity for recovery purposes. And notice how we have 48 hours in between for the recovery. Okay? And the reason that these are taking longer, 2 hours, is because we need much more recovery in between sprints, right? So when you guys were breathing hard just now, that's because we have to kind of go through things quickly. Ideally, I would give you guys much more time in between sets to completely recover. Because if we're practicing movement under fatigue, that is important to do, but sometimes it's not the place, right? Because if we're practicing movement under fatigue all the time, now we might be training bad patterns. Because form can go out the window sometimes with that. So, okay, a lot of strength and conditioning coaches are thinking, well, and maybe not here, but in the other sectors or just in general, right? A lot of strength coaches think, well, athletes generally don't run over 20 yards in field or court sports, right? It's very rare for that to happen, so why train for it? Well, we have to think about it. Again, sorry, a lot of text, I know, sorry. I'm gonna bring you guys through it. It's not that complicated, okay? So, happens extremely rarely in practice scenarios, so it needs to be trained for outside, okay, like I said. For the rare occasion it does happen. There's no better way to train the CNS. We talked about how the nervous system responds uniquely to max velocity sprinting. Even in sports where max velocity is common, the speed mechanics and posture still happen. So even if I am playing in a 10-yard radius, okay, usually I'm popping up to go make a play somewhere else. Usually I am in an upright posture to get somewhere. And we'll talk about this more when we get to change of direction and then agility. So if I I need to get here, so I need to know how to run here, and even if it's at a short distance, okay? No better way to train hamstring deceleration and capacity to decrease risk of hamstring injury, okay? And we'll go into this in the next slide. But that being said, there is a lack of research on this right now. There is actually a lack of research that speed mechanics, increasing max velocity mechanics decreases hamstring injury. It's more of a theory, but we're going to go into why that is in a second and why it actually probably almost definitely does help decrease hamstring injuries. It's a hot topic right now in strength and conditioning. Usual strengthening exercises can reach only 18 to 75%. Okay, of activity reached by the hamstrings during sprinting. So for example, like Nordic hamstring lowering or a hamstring curl, right? That's not the same activity that I get from sprinting, not even close. Core strength, ankle and foot strength, muscle tendon elasticity, and stiffness. Stiffness is a huge thing, okay? These are all trained all at once during max velocity sprinting. Speed reserve is a really big thing that a lot of people are buying into now. Which means if I have a higher capacity to perform for longer duration, so if I can run 40 yards quickly, and I'm able to do that like multiple times, that just means I have that much more capacity to run 10 to 20 yards, if even 20 yards. I've developed that reserve, right? Adaptations through, like I talked about, they cannot be achieved through any other method of training, okay? The ground contact time below 1/10 of a second with extremely high force production. They're unique to sprinting. No other method of training trains all these simultaneously. Sorry for all the text. Okay, so I said we talked about this. So why then do so many hamstring injuries happen during sprinting? Okay, there's a paper recently written this year, okay, by a few leading researchers, a couple being Pierre Samazino and J.B. Marin. These are some of the leading researchers on sprinting, explosiveness, and force production. They came up with these ideas of why this is happening and why. So a lot of studies are coming out like, well, sprinting is almost all the time when hamstring injuries happen. Hamstring injuries almost always happen during sprinting. So why should we even be sprinting at all? Or not almost always happen during sprinting, but that is usually when hamstring injuries happen. You know what I mean? So why should we be training sprinting if we're risking injury doing it? So let's talk about why these studies might have come up with this consensus, right? And what's going on here. So first of all, I think that the rationale behind that is backwards, because if people are getting injured during sprinting, and they're not doing it in practice, and thus they're not learning how to sprint, which might be why they're getting injured, then that means we should be teaching them how to sprint, right? To hopefully reduce those injuries. So the screening, this is directly taken from their paper. Screening procedures are mainly focused on only one isolated risk factor. Usually these things are just strength. They're only measuring strength, only one piece of what's going on during sprinting. Okay, hamstring muscle strength evaluations are mainly based, like I said, on single joint and low velocity, and they're not specific to sprinting. So, like I said, whether that's hamstring curls or Nordic hamstring lowering, they're not reliable enough. They might just not be reliable enough in terms of predicting hamstring muscle injuries. Prevention programs that were implemented at group level, they didn't take into account individual characteristics and deficiencies like we talked about. Everyone has their own deficiencies and characteristics they have to work on for sprinting. They generally show low compliance, and then again, these hamstring strengthening exercises, they just fall short of what actually happens during running, during sprinting. You really cannot replace that, and that's why it's so hard right now. This is such a hot topic, and it's so hard to even do research on this, because how are you even going to measure that activity, right, and see what's going on in such a high velocity state. Okay, moving on. So we'll talk about properties of absolute speed. Higher vertical forces, lower ground contact time. Strike under or slightly in front of the center of mass like I was talking about, just like in acceleration, right? Sustaining momentum becomes a priority because the vertical and the horizontal forces have now zeroed each other out. At some point I've reached max velocity. Foot needs to come off the ground as quickly as possible. So not only am I not producing as much force now on each strike, but if my force has hit the ground, if my foot has hit the ground for too long, I can now add braking forces. That might be a risk of hamstring injury, or that can just slow me down. I'm on the ground for too long, right? We talked about stride length, time stride frequency. This is from Ralph Mann's book, Sprinting and Hurdling. It's a really old book, but these principles still apply to this day. And take this a little bit with a grain of salt, because all of these times were taken on elite sprinters, but the principles remain the same. It still remains the same. So we can see, okay, with each subsequent step, there's a very, very steep decrease in ground contact time. So we can see, like I said in the beginning, how every single step is training a different quality of stiffness, of nervous system, right? That's why this is so important. We can do all of this just in one rep. All of this in one rep of a 20-yard sprint. So, or 40 if we have more space, depending on what you have available to you. So, absolute speed considerations, again, synchronize the front and backside leg action with arm action to maximize hip flexion in the front leg, okay? So if I can have a good amount of arm action, then that leg, again, the leg action is they're supporting each other, okay? Ground contact time as close to center mass as possible, minimize braking forces. And we'll take a step back, take a step back for a second. So the lower ground contact time is important. So if we think about, there's a leading track coach or sprint and rugby strength coach, Jonas Dodu. He's from the UK, and he likes to say being bouncy. Or Nick Winkleman also likes to say being bouncy, right? That's kind of that low ground contact time, being bouncy and stiff off the ground, training that in the weight room, training that on the turf as well. Maximize flight time while minimizing the time on the ground. Maintain solid knee drive while striking the foot as close to center mass as possible. Tall, strong posture, minimize over-rotating because that's a waste of time. And then the arms and legs move around the torso, again, not the other way around. Quiet torso, strong posture, okay? We just talked about all this. So we just talked about the posture comes first, quiet torso, leg action. We have that front and that back side that we think about next, and then that arm action all in synchrony. Hands on. Okay, let's get lined up. We're gonna actually get lined up in the same way as last time. So we'll do rows of 5 again. Ooh. Brain getting tired yet? Start with a pop, float, skip. Remember this one? Okay, so we're gonna start. Yeah, so that would be an 8 skip. So pop, float, skip would be.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go both feet under the hips here. Now we're training here, okay, more vertical force, vertical flight time, and then less ground contact time. We only have 20 yards, so it's important to realize as a strength and conditioning coach, what you have available to you and just make the most of it. We can still train the qualities of absolute speed, and we can still sprint to the 20-yard line, right? I mean, that's enough to get to that absolute speed. So we're gonna start with pop, float, skip. Go ahead and go in place first. Yep, so both feet are landing under the hips at the same time, and then she's gonna go forward, and we're gonna go 10 yards here. Okay, so we see that vertical force moving forward. Okay, let's get started. So we'll go 5 people on my go, and we'll start in place, okay? And it's okay if you look stupid, it's okay, it's not an easy one. Okay, here we go, ready? Yeah, you're laughing because you know. Go, in place, and forward, go. There we go, oh, not bad. Some of you guys have done this before, a couple times. Okay, 10 yards, yeah. Good work. Next group, ready? In place, go. And forward, go. Both feet under the hips, both feet under the hips. Yeah, there we go. Coordination. Pogos. Okay, going back, we're going to be going pogos. Okay? Again, we talked about training speed bouncing during absolute speed. So, pogos, coming forward, ready, go. So she's pulling her toes up and trying to get off the ground quickly with minimal knee bend. Okay, pulling her toes up between every rep. We do want to see a little less arm from that. All right, here we go. Ready, and go. Yes, I like it, okay? We still want some arms in there. We do want the arms to match what we're doing with the lower body. Ready, go. Pulling those toes up, minimal knee bend. Getting off the ground. Come on, man. Come on. Straight leg skip. Okay. So we're going to go straight. We're going to start with straight leg skip now. I'll just have you demo that really quick, Cameron. Yep, exactly. Yep. So this is a good demo because notice how she's not what she's doing really well here is that she's not going all the way up to 90 degrees, right? Because actually when I'm sprinting, so that was really good, was when I'm sprinting, I'm never going all the way up here, right? We're actually gonna be somewhere around here. So that's what we want when we are striking under the ground, right? Moving myself forward, and we're gonna go 10 yards. Here we go. Ready? Go! Nice work, nice work. Good power. Go! Nice, guys. Slight knee bend. Again, just driving under the mat, the center of mass. Straight leg shuffle. Straight leg shuffle, getting into a little higher velocities here. We're going to work our way into this. Okay, ready? Go. Straight leg shuffle. Nice. Okay. Again, like I'm brushing the turf really, really quick. Okay? Here we go. Ready? Go. Moving forward. Yeah. Like that. Go. Work.
I just went super low. I saved 2 my
Yeah, we're actually going to skip that because we'll go into step overs though. So we'll go ankle, shin, and knee. So let's go ankle first. So what we're doing here, okay, we're getting more and more specific to max velocity sprinting, where now we're going to teach a little bit about going on the heel and kind of going up onto the toe. So we're going to go, this would be called like speed dribbles or step overs. So if she has like a very shallow amount of water here, she's just going to come right over that shallow amount of water. Again, the arms are matching. Yep, there we go. We're going to go 15 yards on this one. So she's rolling from her heel to her toe. Okay? Very small movement. Ready? Go! And so this, yeah, you guys can go ahead. We'll just roll right through. Go ahead. Yep. And so this is kind of meant to teach what this progression here. We're teaching the athlete, well, so if my knees are this low, I'm not going fast. The higher my knees go, the faster I'm going to go. So now here we're going to show us the speed dribble over the calf now. So now she's going over the calf, same thing. You can see the speed a little bit faster. Speed's a little bit faster now. Okay, let's get a same line, we're going to do calf. Go! Good, remember, rolling from that heel to the ball of the foot. I like it. Go! Nice. Go. Yeah, posture. I like it.
It makes me mad I don't do it.
Okay, last thing, we're going over the knees now. So we still want that cyclical action. Again, this is different than a high knee drill because with this, now I have a cyclical action still going on. So she's going over her knees now. Yeah, that's really good. Yep, so she's still going heel to toe, and she's going faster now. She's picking up speed because the knees are going so much higher. So let's get group one. Ready? Go. We're gonna go all the way to the 20, by the way, all the way to the 20. So you guys should be speeding up here. This is teaching the athlete that if my knees get higher, I go significantly faster. And it's still obviously an over-exaggeration. But now what we're gonna do, with risking hitting something, so let's not do that. We're gonna go 5 yards of ankles, okay? 5 yards of calves, and then 10 yards of the knee, because with the knee, we do need more space for that. Okay, so we'll go 5-yard ankle, 5-yard calf, and then 5 yards, or 10 yards of the knee. Okay, here we go. Ready? Go! So knees first, or sorry, ankles first, then calves, and then knee all the way to the rest. Go! All right, let's bring it back to the turf for the projector. It worked.
Do you want as many contacts as possible, or do you care more about distance travel with that?
On which one?
Any of these more upright absolute speed drills. We're predominantly like the high knees.
So you guys,
Your dribbles with your high knees.
so do I care more about contacts or what?
Number of contacts, like within the 10 yards, or like, would you want more contacts, or do you want to see more projecting horizontally?
I would say more contacts in this case. Ron, what's your answer to that question? So would you prefer in these absolute speed drills, you would prefer more ground, like contacts on the ground, or more forward velocity?
On the littles to here and to the calf, it's about contact, and then when we get to the higher, it's about
It's more distance. Which makes sense because, like I was saying, the knee's higher needs more distance. Yeah. Okay, good question. Now we're going to get into multi-directional speed. Got plenty of time for this. Okay, this is my favorite part. So, multi-directional speed is huge, obviously, for field and court sports. Okay, this is the importance of multi-directional speed we're going to talk about right here. So, vast majority of sports are not played linearly, like we talked about. While running linearly is extremely important, we do know that we're usually not in most sports running straight ahead. Being able to react and move quickly in multiple planes is key to any field or court sport. So not just straight ahead, not just laterally, again, this is multi-directional, rotationally in weird angles, etc. Critical for decreasing risk of injury. Again, a lot of non-contact injuries happen during deceleration into reacceleration. It's during that deceleration phase when a lot of injuries happen. And there's, we'll talk about more in terms of why that might be. It could be because there's a different demand while the athlete is playing sport because they're not thinking about their form and they're not thinking about, and the mechanics are different with a ball in their hand or with whatever they're doing, which is different than when we're training speed work. And we'll talk about that when we get to the next section of agility. Good multi-directional speed allows for the ability to use linear speed. I can't even, if I can't, like we talked about, I'm always going into linear speed, almost always. So I need to be able to have the capacity to even use that linear speed that we built in the first place. Multi-directional speed work puts every movement skill together. We're putting elasticity together, we're putting core strength, we're putting hamstring, knee, all of these things together into one category. So, does anyone who wasn't here last time know the change of direction versus agility? What's the difference? Okay, so that's okay. So, change of direction. I won't give you guys the answer. I won't give you guys the answer yet. So, what do you see a difference between?
We had one.
Oh.
It's based off of reactive stimulus.
Okay, so which one's reactive?
Agility.
Agility, right? Okay. So, what would they like be reacting to?
So,
Like,
if perfect example of the picture you have there, a defender coming into the field of play, you have to dodge them, or vice versa, and the defender reacting to a ball carrier in a football sense?
Yep, that's a good example. So this would be a change of direction drill, because exactly like you said, so this is going to be, this athlete's doing what looks like the L drill. So he has 3 cones, he has to go around, kind of maneuver around these. He already knows what's gonna happen. Here, this is a controlled, non-reactive scenario. This is actually gameplay. This athlete has to dodge and evade in real time, right? Which is obviously extremely important. So, change of direction work. These 2 athletes, it looks like they both already know what's gonna happen. They are showing decent joint angles. They know they're going around cones, or they're going to some next area where they know they're supposed to go next. Ability to decelerate and reaccelerate in another direction. That's so key to field and core sports, and even in track and field, because with every step, I'm always decelerating and then reaccelerating with the hamstring or other parts of the body as well. Every single step has deceleration, no matter what sport we're playing, honestly. There's always some sort of decel and reaccel going on in another direction for field and court sports. In training, it's a closed, non-reactive environment, meant to teach good deceleration, acceleration mechanics, and develop physical qualities. And we'll talk about this in a second, how this is the ability, while this isn't specific to sport, the ability to do these different drills, I can at least now, I'm learning and developing the ability to be able to develop the capacity to get into these positions in the first place. So while it's not reactive, it's still important to get into these positions, and we'll talk about that more. Develop capacity to get into good positions during agility work, practice, competition. Consists of linear, lateral, and rotational elements. So we'll talk about, this is an athlete performing the 5-10-5. Okay, so this top picture goes from here to here and then back this way. So we can see there's a few different technical considerations we're looking for in change of direction. We want the athlete to know that research is showing that this is a very efficient way to prevent sort of groin and other injuries, is that if the athlete is going and getting low, but anticipating where he's going to go next before he goes the other way. That's key. So you can see this athlete is already getting low before he goes into the next direction change. We're coming up slow. I like to say you have a roof over your house, and then we're going down a gradual descent, and then coming back up through the finish, right? So appropriate shift in center of mass. Center of mass has changed. Again, if we're just stopping like this and then going the other way, I'm prepared to move my center of mass this way. I've saved time, right? Proper shin and joint angles. You can see his shins are facing the other way already by the time he gets there, okay? And then ability to disassociate hips from the torso. So he's able to save time by moving his torso and his torso before his hips, which can kind of save a little bit of time, add a little bit of rotational springiness, and load the inside leg and not popping up. Practical goals here, okay? Increase the capacity to get into advantageous positions and angles, build high speed and more specific deceleration and reacceleration capabilities. I mean more specific because I mean more specific than strength training. More specific than strength training. You can still develop those qualities during strength training, but this is more specific to what's happening in sport, right? And the capabilities are huge to getting into this. I wanted to mention, there's these 2 extremes in strength and conditioning, right? There's one extreme where we shouldn't do change of direction work because it's not because sport is reactive and we should only do agility work. And then there's those that say we should only do change of direction work because we're physical prep coaches, we're not sport coaches. And I totally agree with that. We are not sport coaches. We are not the ones teaching athletes how to do their specific sport. But I do think if we don't have these 2 elements and we don't have the capacity to get into the positions during agility or during sport, then we're leaving something out. And I'll go more into that when we get to agility as well. Okay. Reduce risk of non-contact injury at high velocities. Okay, going into these positions at high velocities is again specific to change of direction. So this is Emily. She's demoing a lateral shuffle. This would be a lateral like push to base. So what we're seeing is that there's a bunch of ways to progress this, and we'll do this in the practical. We can progress this or we can regress it by adding just one step. We can make it 2 steps. We can make it 3 steps here. Or I can also progress it even further by having Mac pull her back towards him. So if they do 3 reps back towards him, there's an added demand on that deceleration. This is Mac now. So looking fast. This is a classic, okay, just change of direction drill here. Okay, I've told him, again, decelerate, reaccelerate, decelerate, reaccelerate. Nothing fancy. We're going into these weird angles, right? This is kind of like a weird position for him to get into, like turning that way, because that happens in sport. If we get into weird positions, we have to go weird ways. And we didn't start with this. We've worked our way up to this. This is a further progression. Okay, so the drill is the same, but what's different?
Decelerating at the end.
Decel at the end. Simple progressions, right? Nothing fancy. Another progression. At a distance. Oh no. So let's see if it works this time. All right, so at a distance, okay, add another 5 yards. I've also added multiple more change of direction. So there's an extra coming up here. So it's weird because he has to accelerate 5 yards, accelerate 10 yards, and then only accelerate 5 yards, and then go backwards 5 yards. It happens in sport. Weird, like these random distances happen in sport. Okay, center of mass versus base. So center of mass needs to follow the base need to follow center of mass. They need to be both in good positions. Again, shifting that center of mass to the way that I want to go before I get there, starting to get ready to go the opposite way. Okay, leg action, inside versus outside, pushing versus pulling. Okay, so I'm always pushing, and I should very rarely be pulling with my groin to get somewhere. I'm getting less force output, and I'm getting high risk of injury. Rotational balance with the arms. Okay, before we do, when we're linear sprinting, we do have a little bit of rotation at the arms because that's just the way that the pec muscles run. But we have even more rotation at the arm when we're doing change of direction work because we need to rotate our body. All right, hands on. This is where it gets fun. Okay, even more fun. All right, we're gonna get the band. We'll start with the shuffle, but you'll actually start without the band. So let's do that. So we're gonna start with a shuffle. Okay, going 10 yards down and back, nice and simple. We're just gonna we're taking a full movement, and then we're breaking it apart, and then we're putting it back together so the athlete can experience it again. So Kim is going to go all the way to the 10 as fast as she can, and then she's going to come all the way back. Yeah, just regular stuff. Good, she's staying low, again, decel, get back as fast as she can, and then decel. We will see a decel at the end instead of rolling out because we want to add a little bit. Again, that can be a progression. Yeah, so we want a dead stop here, but that could also be a progression. Maybe an athlete has some pain in that position, so maybe I have them go a little bit slower here to still work, and maybe I do let them roll out of it because they're uncomfortable getting in that position, right? So let's line up. Again, same thing. We'll get in our groups. I feel like people have left or dropped out of the demos, so we're getting less and less people, but let's still line up. Let's get, how many people do we have? Go. So we'll get 2 lines of 5 now, so it works out. That's how people, 11. Here we go, okay? On my go, we're going 10 yards down and back. Yeah, you might not have room. I guess you might have. Yeah, you might have room. Ready? Go! Good, bring it back. I like it. Speedy. Here we go. Ready? Go!
Yeah, just encroach on everyone's space.
Yeah, it's tight squeeze. Okay.
My feet are
Sagittal only.
Turn strength. So it's gonna get so she's gonna be so she's starting cue now. Some things I might do is I might cue her to either do a crossover or an open step or whatever. But in this case, let's just say I progress with an athlete to the point where I'm like, just figure it out. Just start here and get to the 10 as fast as possible. I think there's something to be said about letting the athlete put things together themselves. Ready? Go! So however feels fastest to her, she's gonna go to the 10. But she's gonna actually go through the 10 because we're gonna be doing so much change of direction in a second. I don't wanna wear anyone out too much. So let's go, let's get lined up again. Same thing, just get to the 10, whatever feels best for you. Go! Crossover. Whatever you, yeah.
Slide up a step, big.
Go! Oh, you guys missed the rep. Missed the rep. Going hard, right into the So multiple ways, a million different ways to train change of direction, and just a couple different ways to kind of progress things. What we'll do here, we'll just do a lateral push to base, and there's a lot of progressions. You guys saw one in the video. We can just add more steps, we can add decelerations, we can increase the speed, all different kinds of ways. I'm just gonna have her, basically in this case, we're starting really simple. Let's just pretend she's a very novice athlete. I'll just have her push the ground away. Just push against the band. Again, I'm putting enough resistance for that external feedback. Go, go, go. See how she's not bounding? Go. Just a good step. Go. Okay, we're gonna go five reps. Okay, we'll go 5 reps going one way. And then actually, what I'm gonna do, guys, I'm gonna add in, if we got time, I'm gonna add in a decel on the way back. So on the way back, I'll say go. Yeah, you wanna show them really quick? So you're gonna have to be, the person pulling is gonna have to be prepared to move out of the way a little bit, because depending on how many contacts you have. But here, on the way back, I'm gonna say go. I'm giving her a pull. Go. Go. Significant increase in deceleration demand. Okay? All right, let's go. We can try to get everyone going. Step up there.
Isaiah, what do you do? Do you
If I have a roof over my head, I'm staying under that roof. What's that? Yeah, pulling, yeah. Go! Go!
There you go.
Go!
Push out. Good push out.
Go!
About that elbow right behind.
Go! Okay, let's take a few, everyone stand up. We'll take like 3 steps this way, because now when we go back, you're gonna cover more ground because you're gonna be getting pulled, if that makes sense. Learn from experience with this. Ready? Go! Yeah. Go! 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 Good. Okay. Again, multiple ways to progress this. Probably the simplest way.
We definitely don't want.
Try not to take up the whole turkey. Both of you.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
You're right. We'll let him go first. Let him go first. Okay.
Go!
Come on, baby.
Go!
Big push. Pick up your feet.
Go! Go! Good. 3 steps this way. Ready, bringing it back. Go! Just a little pull. Go! Not too much. Go!
I overpulled.
Go! Go! Okay. Work.
Yeah.
We're gonna add.
That's why I was trying not to pull too hard.
You ever seen that hockey one where he like
Well, then he doesn't
Good.
see me too.
You're doing crossover? So I mean, you saw me loading up.
We're gonna get 3 people at a time, okay? So we'll do this. Again, there's 3 people, so 1, 2, 3. You guys come up. 1, 2. You have 5, 10, 5. Class and change direction. We know what's coming. We have multiple deceleration, reacceleration. My worst. Okay, so we're gonna have each half. So you'll start. You'll see it. You start there. Start here. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, good question. Let's go this way first. Go. 5.
Push ups.
Nice.
Don't be hitting that cone now.
Save time. Let's go one way. So let's go next 3 people up. Okay, for the sake of time, we're just gonna do that.
So let's change the direction. That's efficient.
Walk 3 crossovers, knock the stops, scoop, sprint out.
Got 3 more. How many more good left? How many more people do we have? We can just get the rest of you guys going at the same time.
Always bad at the 10-yard piece. First, I'm fine with it. I always forget. I'm like, oh, I gotta go a little faster on this. 10 yards away. You open up on the 10?
No, I mean, I accelerated, but I didn't like go for it.
But you're not Lazo anymore.
No, yeah, I come out of that crossover, right? So fucking heavy stop, scoop. We're out.
EJ, you cut the cone! You did! I did not just touch the cone!
Oh.
That's a stone.
That was me. That was my bad.
Did you?
Let's take away the
Coach Phelps.
and then we're gonna do a
He's killing it over there. Look at him.
He's learning.
Coach Phelps, why aren't you running it?
He's too fast.
Okay, we're gonna get 3 people up again. Okay, you're each gonna start outside cone. I'm gonna say go. Now again, we're putting everything together here, right? So I'm gonna say go. We're gonna go sprint, shuffle, back pedal, sprint. Really good. Sprint,
Yeah.
shuffle, back pedal, sprint.
Breakdown.
And we'll sprint again. I could add in volts. I could add in more cones. I could add in more change of directions. I could add a decel at the end. So let's get, those will be some progressions we'll do. So let's get first three up again. First 3 people. We want to be increased to 3 because we only have 3 boxes. Yeah, yeah we can't have them here because
I was like, where? I was like, oh, did they go online or what?
running through.
It's a very smart idea, buddy.
There's a lot of people going this way, so you might not be celebrating. All right, here we go. Ready? Go! Good. Back pedal and bring it forward. We're just going to do some one side, guys, for the sake of time. Ready? Go! You might actually still be able to do this because if you just start here, you can just start here and then.
As soon as I went, I was like, oh,
Ready? Go!
Train's coming.
Big ass.
Hey, I worked hard. Okay, guys, let's sit back down. We're gonna go through agility now. Big topic. Again, guys, bird's eye view of all these things. Bird's eye view of all these things. We can go into a lot more about change of direction, but we're just getting a 1,000-foot view here. So agility, another 1,000-foot view again. Okay, but we'll go fairly in depth. So agility, reacting to the environment. Here we got soccer athletes reacting to a ball, reacting to a defender, reacting to each other. Okay, tennis athlete, again reacting to the ball, being hit to him. Rugby athlete, evading some opponents. The importance of agility, I shouldn't even need to say anymore because you can see the importance of agility here. This athlete, he's able to get out of the way of this athlete. He was able to see him coming. We call that perception-action coupling. He was able to perceive the athlete, okay, in his way, take action, and he was faster than this dude, and he fell on his face, right? So that is why agility is important. But if we want to go more in depth, okay, like I said before briefly, we have these two extremes. We have these coaches who think, well, we're only physical prep coaches, so we shouldn't be training agility. That's all done in sport. Now we have the other coaches who think we should only do agility. I'm throwing out all my change of direction movements because sport is only reactive. So these two extremes, and I think we've done a good job saying why change of direction is important because I have the capacity now and the work capacity to get into those positions. Now we're gonna see why should we as strength and conditioning coaches still work on agility? I think it's pretty obvious why it's important, but why should we be doing it and not just the sport coaches? Because I'm not saying we should act like sport coaches or run practices or take athletes through their sport at all. What I'm saying is, should we incorporate reactive things even though they're still doing it in their sport? Okay, sorry for the text, I'll take you guys through it. Sport's completely reactive. While practice gets this agility work, it's important to use movement skills taught in a reactive but controlled environment. Okay, if I'm here, I'm in a very controlled environment where I can see every athlete very closely, can see what's going on. Allows the athlete to self-organize and figure out his or her movement puzzle. That movement puzzle word comes from Altus, which is a track and field, famous track and field company. Their movement puzzle means that how do they get in these positions, in a reactive position? How are they personally able to do it, right? Allows them to find their own solution to the movement problem. That's something that comes from Sean Mishka, who is a leading researcher in terms of agility and dexterity. So there's always these movement problems going on. What's my personal solution to that movement problem? Athletes aren't thinking of their mechanics while they're playing. Okay, they're not thinking of their dorsiflexion. They're not thinking of getting into good joint angles when they're cutting. They don't even know when they're going to have to cut most of the time, right? So most of the time. So they're not thinking about these things, which means we should be training them, not thinking about them when I can watch them in a controlled environment and see what's going on, right? Allows for true max effort work. I think we can all agree that when you're competing against someone or competing against a teammate, you're going to really give 100%, right? It's pretty hard to get athletes most of the time to give true 100%, like true 100%, unless they're actually competing against someone, right, or reacting to something. True max effort work, super important. I think there's really something to be said about that. Allows performance coach to watch them closely. Identify specific areas of improvement, qualities, in a reactive scenario where an athlete can't hide anymore. Like I said, the athlete is now not thinking about what their body is doing. They're thinking about reacting to the environment. So they can't maybe hide these deficiencies anymore that they might be able to if they were already thinking about what they were going to be doing, right? Jumping directly into training camps. This is a big thing. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Let's take most sports have around an 8-week off season. So let's just take football as a classic example, right? So let's say there's a classic collegiate football 8-week off season before the athletes go into training camps, right? If I'm going and doing only change of direction work and weight room work and whatever, and not doing any reactive work, and then all of a sudden they're jumping into training camps, and now we're seeing all these big spikes in injuries when these NFL players are going to training camps. I've set them up for failure because they've gone 8 weeks now without reacting to anything, and then they're giving this completely different effort, these completely different angles, right? If they're holding a ball now, and they haven't been doing that for 8 weeks, now their mechanics are completely different. I'm not saying in the off season as a strength coach, we have to make them play football or whatever, but you kind of get my point, where we have to have these different mechanics that might be neglected for the off season. Again, sorry for all the text where you guys threw it. It's been shown that results from there was a study done by a couple leading researchers. This again is old study, but it's a pretty famous study by Jeremy Shepard and Tim Gabbett. They're a couple leading researchers on like rugby and agility development in terms of rugby. And the conclusion, okay, so they did these 2 tests. Right? They did a change of direction test and they did agility test. And these two, the change of direction tests, okay, they correlated really closely to each other, but they didn't the results, like the times, didn't correlate to the agility test. It was completely random. In other words, the change of direction skills do not transfer to agility. They just, you can say the secondary properties like we talked about, which is the work capacity, the positions that I can get into, etc., the injury prevention, transfers in a secondary way, but actually does not directly transfer to agility performance directly, right? So, results of change of direction tests have been shown also not to be indicative of elite versus sub-elite players, okay? So they took these 2 different classes of rugby athletes. They took sub-elite and elite rugby athletes, and they took the agility tests of both of these classes, and almost without fail, the elite rugby athletes had better agility tests than the sub-elite rugby athletes. And they didn't have differences in change of direction times, really. So results of agility tests have been shown to be indicative of a higher skill level of an athlete, and change of direction has not been. Again, not that change of direction is important, we just went over all that, but it's important to have both. Athlete can be, and I think we all know athletes who are really good at cone drills, but they're not really good at their sport, right? When they actually get on the field, when they actually get to play. Sport consists of reacting with the environment. I'm not always thinking about what's going on in my body, I'm reacting to something. Athletes are presented with a wide range of stimuli and movement choices in any given moment. There's this dynamic and changing interaction with the environment is really important. It's always happening in sports, so we need to train that as well. And then this comes from another paper. So skill acquisition, like motor learning or just learning in general, it comes from actually reacting with the environment. So not like if I'm thinking about what I should be doing with my body all the time, I don't learn as well as if I'm reacting to something or just putting it into practice in a way that's more specific. So this comes from a paper by Sean Mishka and a couple others on agility drills and the importance of agility, basically creating and progressing agility drills, right? And essentially, there's thousands of ways, endless ways that you can have fun with this. So we can create time constraints. So we can tell an athlete, okay, I need you to do this and this and this in this many seconds, in 10 seconds. We can add an object, so we can add a ball, something to dodge, whatever that is. Important to know, it shouldn't be a stationary object, because then it's change of direction, but I can still put an object there and have the athlete react around it, and we'll kind of see in an example in a second. The athlete can react around it, but it can't just be adding an object and having them run around it in a specific way. That's not agility, it's change of direction. Space constraints, increasing the that increases the intensity because there's more change of direction going on. Okay. Add and increase or decrease any number of opponents. We can add opponents. Anything else progress over time, and then we can make the drills more specific. Again, sport-specific training is kind of a weird, bad word, but there's something to be said about still doing something specific. There should be some differences between the way that we train different sports. There should just be some differences, even if they're very small. So, and it depends on the level of athlete too, but you get the point. So name a perceptual cognitive skill an athlete has to make in competition is number one. So name some sort of, it talks about perception action coupling. So perceptual, cognitive, meaning like catching a ball. Just think about that. Manipulate one task or environmental constraint within a drill to train the skill. An example could be adding a object, adding a trash can or whatever it is in front of the person. Incorporate directional instruction to guide athletes' attentional focus to the perceptual cognitive skill. This is coaching. This is telling the athlete what we want from them. So, this is a youth tennis athlete I have, okay, and this is right now, this is a change of direction drill. This is kind of like, this would be like a form of curvilinear running, which is important. It's a little different than curvilinear running because we have less space, the turns are a little more sharp. But the point is, the athlete here knows what he should be doing, right? He already knows, I'm going to the right, I'm going to the left, I'm going to the right, as fast as I can. Now I've progressed the change of direction drill. I should just put this in the change of direction. But so I've progressed it. Okay, I've made the cones a little bit. I've basically just went 1 yard, changed the position of the cones. It's a different demand now. Now I've taken this same drill. I've turned it into an agility drill. If you hear me. Now, simple way to make this agility. I've only told him where to go the first time. I only said, I'm going to tell you which way to go. I'm only going to tell you which way to go for the first thing, and then you're just going to go around and the rest of it the same. So it's agility, but it's not a big progression. Now, let's make this even harder. Could be faster.
Left. Right. Right. And then bring it down. There.
So I've added multiple changes of direction. He has to change, he has to think and respond now, not just once, but multiple times. Right? This is a progression. So that is another way that I can add progressions to this. So what are some other things that you guys think I could have done to progress this even more?
You could add an opponent or something like that. Well, I guess he's tennis, it doesn't matter so much. But
So okay,
yeah.
so I was gonna say that. So this isn't. I don't know what's happening with the projector. This isn't quote unquote tennis specific, and while it may not be tennis specific, it is specific in the sense that he's responding to something, right? So he's playing tennis like 4 days a week. Do I really have to do probably don't really have to do too much specific tennis work with him. But now I'm adding in an element of fun. Okay, that's another importance of agility. It keeps things fun, right? The athletes are having fun, which is pretty important. And it gets him a little more specific while not just playing his sport all the time. But anyway, so that was good, adding an opponent, sure. What's another way that we could progress this?
You go with colors. So you
Yeah.
So you say red, green, blue, whatever.
If we have different cone colors? Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Can you do like up downs? So the shuffle and then like down and then up and then to the right?
So, yes, but let's think of that. That would be a progression. That would be more of a physiological, work capacity progression, right? Because he's not, that's just something that he already knows to do now. So he knows, okay, now I go down and up, which makes it harder, but it's not adding an agility progression. Does that make sense? Kind of. So it's not a bad thing.
Even if you're telling them that you're when to do it?
When, exactly. Yeah, you could say, okay, now, yeah, exactly. So, okay, down, up. Okay, go, that would be great. So adding your voice, adding colors. I could throw him a ball, right? I could just use my hands. So he has to just pay attention to my hands in some sort of way. What's that? Have him close one eye? I've never used that. I like that. All right. Sweet. I like that. So from the same paper that we talked about before with Sean Mishka and others, so this is essentially optimal agility performance consists of these things. Okay? These are the things that are within, this is the stuff that's within the organism or the athlete in this case. This is all within the athlete. Now, reaction time, vision, prior knowledge of the play going on, playing experience, okay, kinetic, kinematic, muscle activity, physical things as us as strength coaches that we can train extremely to an extreme extent. These are all things within them that we don't really control in terms of drills, right? We control this stuff in the weight room and other ways, but and what we're doing. But in terms of our drills, okay, these things are what we're controlling, right? This is so if we're thinking about the task, okay, I can manipulate the task, meaning I can add or decrease players. The size of the players, I can place smaller against bigger athletes, that kind of thing. The speed of the movement can change, like I said before, increasing the intensity. Hey, now we're going this speed. Object manipulation, presentation of a visual stimulus, hands, miniband colors, cone, throwing a cone and they have to go around the cone, right? Like there's literally endless possibilities, which is why agility is so fun for coaches and for athletes. So environment, I can add distractions, I can add a type of a visual stimulus. Okay, playing surface can change. These are all different things. And when we go back to the physical, this is so key. We can realize while strength, like as strength and conditioning coaches, while the strength and conditioning might not directly transfer to agility, now we can see that it actually does help agility, because now I'm able to get in and out of these positions with less risk of injury and more explosively, and be stronger in those positions. So that does play a factor in agility, well, even if it's not directly. Reactive drills, small and large-sided games, competition, and races. These are just a couple examples of how we can train agility. And now we're going to do our last hands-on portion. We got just enough time. So, a little bit different. How many people do we have now? So we have. Can you jump in?
Yeah.
Just so we have 10 people, it would help. Are you feeling sore? Is your knee hurting? Okay, guys, we're gonna get in groups of 2. Okay, we're gonna get in groups of 2 and we'll line up right here. I'm gonna demo with Cameron really quick. Yeah, we'll go. This is a really popular classic agility drill. It's called a mirror drill, right? So Cameron's gonna be right here. I'll be the one, or she'll be the one reacting to me. So whichever way I go. So I, as the coach, I'm gonna give a go, and then they're gonna start reacting. So I say go, and you're gonna react to me, right? And my next go is gonna be running, let's just say through the 5-yard line now. So we'll go 2 people at a time, and we'll start here, and you'll be pairs of 2. I'll say go. The person on my right is going to be reacting to the person on my left. So the person here reacting to the person here. First go, second go, you're sprinting out through the 5. So now this is a pretty, if we think about it, it's a common agility drill, but it's an advanced drill, because not only are they reacting to my voice twice, but they're also reacting to the person right in front of them. So that's like 3 different things they have to think about at the same time, right? Okay, so let's get in our groups. Do we do the number? Or was that
I'll go. Oh, sorry, my bad. My bad. We'll let you guys go.
Does this make sense? Make sense to everyone? You're the one being here. Yeah. You're following her. Yeah. Yeah. All right, here we go. Ready? Go! Go! Got some cheers.
Push that way, Jack.
Oh, there's only a couple.
Push that way. 3 2. So hold on. Grab it.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Ready? Go.
Don't fake me out.
Go.
That was fun.
Okay, we're gonna decrease the intensity a little bit. We'll go rock, paper, scissors. Okay, whoever wins, me and Cam will go here again. So whoever wins rock, paper, scissors. Okay, we'll go rock, paper, scissors, shoot. The person who wins gets to run first. Ready? Go. Corner to go to. Okay, so which way to go? Right now, we're again a million ways to progress box drills. Let's just say right now, just get to the corner. I say, just get to one cone. So I'll say I'll point. I'll say she should react to my voice and the stimuli. So I could say like back this way. She has to know. She knows she has to go back. She also has to respond to the way I'm pointing, right? So back, go as fast as you can. Yeah. Back. Good. Forward, and she always gets back here. Right? Okay, good. All right, let's get 4 people. We can do this with 4 people now. So 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes.
First time it's like you didn't have a response.
All right, can everyone see me? I'll put my hands up really tall, so I'll put my hands up really high. Okay, so we're gonna go, I'll say go, we're gonna go quick feet. Okay, after I say quick feet, or after I say go, that's when I'll say which direction to go. Okay, here we go, ready, quick feet, go. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. Back. And break. Good work. See how I can set up weird directions to go in like sport, right? Let's get the next.
Watch him do this tomorrow when I come.
You feel me, man? Gonna be working.
I enjoy it.
Go ahead.
I enjoy it.
No, I feel you.
There we go. See you. Ready? Quick feet, go. Forward. Forward. Back. Come on. Back. Back. Forward. Yeah. Good enough.
There's stuff back there.
We have to get 2 more people. Oh, whoa. No coordination trust either.
No, he's good, Sam. You're going to take him space.
Ready? Go. Forward. Back.
Oh, God.
Forward. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. Back. Back. So you see, adding intensity, adding reps, different changes of direction. These are all ways to progress, right? And we're still not done. We got a couple more, okay? So now we're gonna take, this will be a fun one. Now we're gonna take, this last one we're doing, we have 2 people that are now facing each other. So you're gonna get your same boxes. Both people will be facing each other. One, and let's just have you react on me again. Okay, so I'll be here. I'm gonna get to another place however I want, however feels fastest to me. Again, putting the movement puzzle together, figuring out the solution to the movement problem my own way. So, and she's gonna mirror me. So, opposite then, yeah. So she'll be going, so whichever way I go, you're gonna go that way. So that would be opposite, yeah. So whichever way I go, she's going to the same respective side of hers, right? So we go here, ready, go. See, does that make sense? Okay, does it make sense? Yeah, okay. But it's not. It is.
It's only opposite on the back.
Exactly.
The front two.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So opposite is only backwards, not forward.
So it's not. It's not opposite if you think of it this way. It's not opposite if the person is
like drop to your right.
Exactly.
I chose right.
So I actually go to my left, your right. So it is opposite. It's not.
Oh, Zachary.
So you're going to your right.
Coach Phelps, you make your ball.
Okay, here we go. Shoot!
Oh shit! Right there.
And so here I can just increase the amount of time.
Oh god.
All right. Okay, so
That's hard. That's hard. I'm glad I chose over there.
So, guys, you can see how right here it's easy for me to progress this. I can time it and be like, okay, now they're going to go for 5 seconds. Now they're going to go. This week they're going to go for 10 seconds. This week they go for it's easy to progress, and you can see this is a time scenario. People are responding to different things. Here we go. Ready? Go. I'm not timing in this case, but I could. See, all the things you have to think about. Am I going opposite? Am I going the same way? What are they doing? What am I supposed to do? We got one more matchup, right? Are we skipping the matchup?
Hold on. He's got more to talk about.
Yeah, we got 2 minutes. That's essentially it. So, real quick, in conclusion, okay, body composition is paramount for being as fast as possible. We talked about how body weight is weight best for weighing out at all times. Okay, strength and foundation is speed to be built upon. It might not directly influence speed, but it gives me the capacity to possibly get faster, right? A good speed and agility program should be all-encompassing, taking into consideration the specific demands of the sport. Linear speed, including acceleration and absolute speed, should not be neglected. We talked about all the reasons they're so important. We should still incorporate both of those. Change of direction with agility work should be incorporated in a speed and agility program with a high emphasis on proper progressions and regressions, which is where a coach comes in. That's very important. Like in the next point, periodize appropriately, right? Just like you're periodizing your weight room program, you should be periodizing your speed and agility work as well. That's the way we can transfer higher to score the correct times, and we can also decrease risk of injury. Thank you guys. Do we have any questions?
I don't have my phone. Get a social media.
I had one. I can't remember what it was. It'll come to me.
Yeah, you can.
It'll come to me. I got your number. Dude, this is